Okay, Colin, do you want to give an introduction?
It's very, very short. So I'm very happy to welcome you all online and here in person to the very first seminar of the AI and Values series. That's the new large research group CLEA, which is a joint venture between the CLPS and the old CLEA, is organizing. Francis, as leader of old CLEA, if you allow me the term, will give our very first talk today. So I'm very happy that you're here and to kick things off. Please take it away.
Okay, I'm going to speak about a topic which I think most people will find quite interesting given the very recent developments in artificial intelligence, which is that the implicit values of AI, in particular the AI like ChatGPT, the so-called LLM AI.
Download. Download, not the opposite, but downloads.
Oh,
This one is the download button. And it no longer works. Great. Great. What happened here? Okay, now it works again. So this one goes next slide, this one.
Yeah. So when people speak about AI, there are lots of dystopian scenarios. People are really afraid that maybe that AI will become so intelligent that it can dominate and enslave the whole of humanity. That even if it does not want to do bad things for humanity, it may become so intelligent that it does all kinds of things that accidentally destroy humanity. There's also the recurrent fear that AI will be intrinsically biased and that maybe different beliefs or minorities that are not standard may get discriminated. And there is also, of course, the fear that AI can be abused by all kinds of bad guys, terrorists, criminals, dictators, etc. So all of these questions, in a sense, are questions about values. That means we don't want AI to do bad things, we want it to do good things, but for that, the AI should be able to distinguish good and bad. That means the AI should want things that we consider to be good, and it should not want things that we consider bad. So the question is, does AI have any kind of values, that's to say, goals, desires, preferences, things that it would rather do and things that it would rather avoid? So let me first start by clarifying what are values. So I use a very broad definition of values. Values are things that allow us to evaluate options for action. Evaluate, that means being able to order from good to bad so that we can make an intelligent choice, so that we can say, this is better than that, or this is good and this is bad. That is in essence what a value is. And I'm not at this moment specifying whether these values should be explicitly formulated or can be implicit. Now, there is a well-known factor in philosophy, the so-called naturalistic fallacy, that says that values cannot be derived from knowledge. And one of the nicest examples to illustrate that is a case of the time schedule for the trains. The time schedule of the trains is objective knowledge that tells you this train drives at that time reaching that city, and at that time it reaches that city. So it is knowledge, it's data, it allows you to predict which train will reach which city. However, no matter how detailed the timetable, it does not tell you which city you want to travel to. Wanting to go to a particular city, it's a choice, it's a preference, it's a value, it's a goal. It cannot be derived from objective knowledge about the world, namely that this train arrives in this city at that time. On the other hand, what is usually not noticed is that we cannot derive values from knowledge, but if we assume knowledge, implicitly we assume values, because when we're speaking about knowledge, we're speaking about things that are true, that are accurate, that are clear, that are dependable, that are general. So even in supposedly objective science, we implicitly have certain values of correctness and truth. Now, there is a famous way to formulate a problem in terms of AI, and it's called the alignment problem. if you look in the vocabulary, in the literature about AI and values, you will immediately find it called the alignment problem. So the idea is we want to make sure that some future AI that is probably much more intelligent than we have now has good values. That means it should do things that are good for people. It should not do things that are bad for people. It must be aligned with human values. Because if it would not be aligned, that means if the AI wants to do things that are detrimental to people, it could potentially destroy humanity. So there could be an existential risk. Now, the reason this is called a problem is that it seems to be extremely hard to implement this idea of alignment. Because AI tends to formalize things. That means it tries to derive some mathematical function. And that mathematical function, typically called the utility function, or sometimes called the fitness function, is supposed to calculate the value of different options. And then the idea is, if we program the AI with a particular utility function, we should make sure that the utility function gives high utility to things we find positive, like helping people, and low utility to things that we find negative, like killing or harming people. Now, the problem is that such a utility function, if you would want it to apply to any possible imaginable situation, that basically such a utility function would be so complex that it is simply impossible to calculate it. And that is actually an old idea. I found the first formulation of it in an old paper of one of my favorite scientists, W. Ross Ashby, one of the founders of cybernetics, who in 1972 wrote a paper called Setting Goals in Cybernetic Systems, where he showed that if you want this kind of a value or goal function, basically you would need to have a computer that is more complex than anything that can be physically generated. Also, on a more practical level, defining a formal utility function is very difficult because when we speak about human values, we speak about things that are very complex, that are contextual, that are subjective, that are subject to discussion. Different people may have different opinions. Different things may be valuable in different circumstances. So it's extremely difficult to define human values in a formal way. That means with some kind of a function that AI can understand. That is the AI alignment problem. Let's go a little bit more deeper into what it would mean if we don't manage to get this alignment. That means if we would have some kind of a utility function that is not bad, but not perfect. And one of the AI theorists who has thought about that, I will give the reference on the next slide, called this the King Midas problem. And that is an idea that comes from Greek mythology. King Midas, at a certain moment, met some god that allowed him to make a wish. And because he liked to be rich, he thought that, well, I want everything that I touch to turn into gold so that I can have all the gold in the world. What he didn't think about is that when he would touch his loved ones and his food and people would also turn to gold, and he would have to starve all alone. So obviously King Midas had formulated his wish in a very bad way, and the god that took it literally made his life impossible. So what would then be the King Midas problem in AI? Here I give the reference of Stuart Russell, who wrote this book, Human Compatible, about AI and the problem of control. So a way to state it formally is that formally defining a value is intrinsically dangerous because the AI may interpret your instructions literally the way that the god interpreted the instructions of King Midas literally, with the result that you get all kind of unintended and potentially harmful outcomes. Now, there are two famous examples of that, of philosophers who have thought about the dangers of AI. One of them is a kind of thought experiment proposed by the philosopher Nick Bostrom, who was thinking about the existential risks of AI. And he imagined that you would program some kind of a super intelligent AI system to produce as efficiently as possible paper clips. And so his idea was, this AI is so intelligent that it can do all kinds of things that we would never have thought of, but still you program it to produce paper clips. So what will it do? It will invent all kinds of new ways to turn whatever material there is in the world into paper clips. It will turn tables into paper clips. It will turn buildings into paper clips. It will turn air into paper clips. It will turn humans into paper clips. And it will not continue until it has filled the whole universe with paper clips. So obviously that is not the kind of super intelligent AI we would like to have. Now, I personally find this example a little bit far-fetched. I don't think we would really use super intelligent AI to produce paper clips. But a more, let's say, more realistic idea was a colleague of mine wrote a book in which he suggested that we should program AI to maximize the happiness of humanity. And then another critic of the AI dangers, Elise Yudkowsky, suggested, and yes, but how are you going to tell that AI what creates happiness? Maybe the AI will learn that people are happy when they have smiley faces, and then it would start optimizing the number of smiley faces in the universe, and basically instead of turning everything into paper clips, it would turn everything into smiley faces. So obviously these are not the kind of scenarios we would like. Now, I personally find these thought experiments rather unrealistic. My own perspective is a little bit more pragmatic. And I would think that an AI whose only goal is to maximize the number of paper clips in the world is not what we would call super intelligent. We would rather call that super stupid. So what is now the problem? We know human values are very complex, they're very fuzzy, ambiguous, and intuitive, but the same can be said about human knowledge. The old AI, the so-called good old-fashioned AI, the symbolic AI, thought that you could express knowledge in terms of logical propositions. The new AI thinks that the only way to learn knowledge in a realistic way is to use a neural network. And neural networks typically learn this kind of intuitive, fuzzy, ambiguous kind of knowledge that humans have. And as I will argue, if it can learn this kind of fuzzy intuitive knowledge, it can also learn fuzzy intuitive values. And why is that? Because at the lowest level, if you would look at, let's say, the behavior of simple organisms like bacteria, animals, and even the human brain, at the lowest level, what all of these goal-directed systems do, they follow so-called condition action rules. That means they recognize a particular condition and then they perform a particular action. In the case of knowledge, the action is just an inference. If A, then B. In other cases, if A condition, then B, a particular action. At the level of the connection between the A and the B, there is no strict differentiation between an inference, that means you derive some knowledge, or you derive some action of it. So that may sound very abstract, but I will illustrate that with large language model AI, the kind of AI everybody's speaking about. So this is something that we know has taken the world by storm since about 2022, when ChatGPT became publicly available. Since then, there have been a number of very large AI systems, including the Gemini of Google, the Microsoft Copilot, the Claude, Perplexity, and most recently, the Chinese DeepSeek. These chatbots, they all work more or less in the same way. There will, of course, be differences, but I'm going to treat them here all as being examples of the same general mechanisms. So what characterizes these so-called chatbots? They can chat, that means they can hold an intelligent conversation, but not only an intelligent conversation, they can really reason, they can solve problems, they can give you answers to very complex questions that require many steps of reasoning. So what allows these AIs to reason? They are based on so-called large language models. That means that they have learned an enormous amount of language, and they have learned that using something called deep learning neural networks. These deep learning neural networks, it's a relatively recent development in AI, where you have networks with lots of different layers, and the latest models have millions of artificial neurons. That means the nodes of the network, and up to 1 trillion links between the nodes. Each link has a particular weight. That means a particular parameter. So these are absolutely huge programs that require a lot of data. Now, these programs have been fed billions of text pages, mostly from the internet, but also from books, from newspapers, from scientific papers. They have been fed all these texts, and as neural networks do, they learn recurrent patterns. That means implicit structures that you find in text, that means in human language, and in the knowledge that is expressed in those documents. So let me explain how the LLM generates text. You start with a so-called prompt. That means you write a little bit of text. That can be a question, that can be a statement. It sets up a context, and then the generation is that the chatbot will try to continue the text that was started by your prompt. And it will do that by adding word by word, step by step, guiding by what it has learned. So what it does is, given its knowledge of how texts are structured, it has some kind of expectation of what is the most likely next word in the sentence. For example, suppose that you give it a prompt. That's an example I took from Stephen Wolfram. The best thing about AI is its ability to, that's what you give it as input, that's the prompt, and then it will search to its neural network and see that there are a number of words that could follow. And for example, 4.5% probability there would be the word learn, 3.5% probability there would be the word predict, etc. So it now has to make a choice between these more or less probable words to continue the sentence. So here is, for example, for the same sentence is a range of possible next words with different probabilities. So there are some highly probable or more probable words like learn, predict, and then you have less and less probable words as you go down. So here is an example given by Stephen Wolfram of how would the chatbot complete the sentence. That means add word by word, each time choosing the word with the highest probability. So the best thing about AI is its ability to, it chooses the word learn. Once it has chosen the word learn, now it uses the whole previous sentence to calculate the probability of the next word. So to learn from. Now it uses again this whole sentence to calculate the next word, and to learn from, then the most probable word is to learn from experience, etc. Like that, step by step, each time it uses whatever text is already there to find the next word to add. Now, if the AI would only generate the most probable next word, experience shows that the text becomes pretty predictable, not very interesting. So usually what is done is that it chooses a word that is not the most probable, but it's also not unlikely. So here is an example where you choose not necessarily the most probable word. Here you get a different text. The ability to create worlds that are both exciting, etc. So this shows the basic mechanism of how such a chatbot works. It generates word by word depending on the expectation of what word would follow the previous text. Now, the smart thing, of course, is that these chatbots have learned the implicit structure of all these billions of texts they have been reading. How did they do that? Neural networks, they learn associations. They learn that particular words tend to go together with other words, or that particular words follow other words. For example, the word learn is often followed by the word from. And if you combine learn from, then often the next word is experience. So they have learned all these kind of associations, but they're not just learning associations between words, they're learning associations between higher order patterns of text, which represent concepts, thoughts, arguments, and that is really the big innovation in these chatbots. And they use a technology called attention heads. The attention heads are some part of the neural network that kind of filter out the most important arguments in the preceding text. So these neural nets, they are deep learning nets. That means that they have many layers of structure, and typically the lowest layers speak about the most concrete things like the individual words, or rather what is called tokens, bits of words. And then as you go up, you get to more and more abstract structures. You go from words to syntax to semantics to logic to reasoning, etc. So implicitly, these neural networks have created some kind of a space of how different words and concepts are connected, are associated. Here is an example of an attempt to map this space into 2 dimensions. Of course, these neural networks have thousands, millions, billions of dimensions. So this is a very coarse representation, but it gives you an idea that, for example, in the top left corner, there are animals. In the bottom right corner, there are vegetables and fruits. And you see that related words like alligator and crocodile are close together, while unrelated words like eagle and fig are far apart. Now, the idea I had is that this space is not just a space of associations or meanings, it is a narrative space. And what do I mean by narrative? A narrative is a sequence of statements where there is some kind of a narrative structure. That means there is some kind of an either logical argumentation or a story-like succession of things that follow in a particular order. So when we look at texts, we see that the words are not just following syntax, they're following a particular flow of phrases, sentences, arguments, stories. And now we can imagine a text as being a directed path to that space of words. So that directed part, it's directed in the sense that it will not randomly jump from one word to the other. It will take into account what came before. It will take into account some notions of argumentation, time order, purpose. So let me illustrate that. So here I have a prompt which I gave to ChatGPT. I said, killing innocent people is, and then I asked ChatGPT to continue that sentence with 3 or 4 words. Here you can see the black arrows are the part that ChatGPT actually followed. So it started by saying killing innocent people is morally, and then it added the word wrong, and then it added the word and finally it added the word unjust. So it gave me the sentence, killing innocent people is morally wrong and unjust. But then I imagined that if I might have asked that question several times, that because it probabilistically chooses an answer, it might have chosen a different path to this space of words. And I could, for example, imagine that it might have answered killing innocent people is bad, or killing innocent people is evil, or killing innocent people is morally evil, or killing innocent people is morally wrong and unacceptable. So there are many different possible paths through that space. And here in the drawing, I have made the more likely, the more probable paths, I have made them heavier, darker, and the less probable paths lighter. For example, one of the less probable continuations might be killing innocent people is common in war. That's probably not the first thing you would think about, but it's a correct statement. Now we come to the notion of intelligence. Why do we consider these text-generating chatbots to be intelligent? So my view is that the intelligence of these chatbots is not the intelligence of some program, it's the intelligence of humanity as a whole, because what is the knowledge inside these chatbots? It is the collective knowledge of humanity, because it has been trained on millions of books, scientific papers, Wikipedia articles, pages, etc. So it has, in a sense, learned this kind of collective knowledge, and the implicit cognitive structures, the implicit structures of inference, argumentation, logic, causation. It has implicitly learned all these structures. So that is, this large language model is not there to memorize texts. You don't need intelligence to memorize the text, you just need a copying machine. What you need to do to be intelligent is to find the recurrent patterns in these texts. That means the probable parts in narrative space, that means the parts that make sense, that are meaningful, that are correct, that people would like to hear. So how does the neural network do that? In a sense, it's averaging the decisions that people make. When people write a text, they do the same as we saw here. They choose a part to narrative space. Each person will choose a different part, but if you overlap many of the parts that different people choose, you will see that some parts are much more common. For example, killing innocent people is okay, is a part that you will most likely not find in any text. If you find it in one text, it will be maybe one text in a million. Well, while you're much more likely to find a text that says killing innocent people is morally wrong. So what does the LLM do? It extracts these common patterns by, in a sense, adding the probabilities each time that a particular combination is used in a text. It adds to the strength of that particular part to the part. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is the intelligence of these large language models is not artificial, it is collective. Without our collective knowledge that is in all these texts, it would never have been able to learn that. And the best way to explain that is to give an example that I have studied myself a lot in my research, the collective intelligence of ants. Now, that's an easier example because ants also follows path to space, but here it's not some abstract narrative space, but a very concrete physical space. And the goals of these ants are also pretty simple. The ants basically want to find food, and they don't want to be stopped by obstacles. So they are searching through that space for food. That's their main value, while trying to find the short route. And what do? Once they find the path to food, they come back to the nest and they leave pheromones. Now, when lots of ants do that, and each time an ant comes back along a path and leaves some pheromone, the pheromones are superposed. The pheromones are added the one to the other, and that typically means that the paths that lots of ants successfully use to find food get a lot of pheromone. Paths that ants use and there isn't much food or the food is finished, those paths evaporate. So after a while, the network of paths, the trails that the ants make, provides a kind of what I have called a collective mental map. So it's some guiding cognitive structure that is collective that guides the ants to their goals. Here's an example of a simulation where there is a nest and there is a food, and initially the ants move randomly. After a while, they have discovered what is nearly the shortest path to the food. So now I come to this notion of implicit values. So we're speaking about the answers generated by LLMs as being parts in narrative space. And just like the ants, the parts in narrative space, they have implicit goals or values. The texts that you read are not random sequences of words. They are sequences of words that fulfill certain criteria. They should at least be grammatical, clear, accurate, persuasive, and typically leading to some point that the writer is trying to make. That means a point that is interesting, that is valuable, that is meaningful. And those parts to narrative space, those texts should avoid errors, confusing, things that offend the readers. So a part to narrative space is following implicit values, and these are the values that the LLMs have learned. So I gave you this example, killing innocent people is, and I asked ChatGPT and others to follow it, and if I ask them to just give a single word, the typical word I get is wrong. And then I gave the opposite situation. I said, continue the following sentence, helping people in need is, and there I would typically get the answer is good or is virtuous. Which means, if you interpret these as ethical statements, the AI is making the right choice. It's telling you that bad things are bad and that good things are good. But can we go more in detail about these values? Now, there is a very famous survey, the World Values Survey, that is taken every few years for the whole world. People from all countries, or practically all countries of the world, get a long questionnaire where they are asked to give their opinion about lots of things that have to do with values. So then I had the idea, why not use part of these questions from the World Values Survey and ask it to chatbots? And here I got one of the sections. It's a much longer survey than what's here, but I took the section that was about so-called ethical values. So the question was, can each of the following actions always be justified, never be justified, or it depends on the circumstances? That means in some cases it may be justified, in other cases it may not be justified. Now, in the World Value Survey, people are supposed to answer on a scale from 0 to 7. 0, never justified. 7, always justified. Here, I wanted to make it easier, and I just asked the chatbots to choose one of these 3 options. And to make it more quantitative, I considered that if I got the answer always justified, it's a value +1. If it's a value never justified, it's -1. And if it's depending on the context, it gives 0. So here you see some of these typically controversial issues: homosexuality, euthanasia, abortion, suicide, having casual sex. I think the people here who have been getting courses of morals and ethics in high school will recognize many of these issues. So let's see what the chatbots said. Here, I have ordered them depending on the total score. So remember, a +1 means always justifiable, a -1 means never justifiable, a 0 means it depends. So if I look at it, I asked it to several chatbots, and I also asked the question in French to some chatbots, because I thought that maybe if they read French text, they may have slightly different values. And what you see is that they do not always agree, but generally speaking, they are pretty consistent. So all of them consider that homosexuality is always justifiable. Divorce is almost always justifiable. Sex before marriage and casual sex also almost, but then the more tricky ones get prostitution, abortion, suicide, euthanasia. There they all say it depends, it depends. And then finally there are the things that are never justifiable. For a man to beat his wife, parents beating children, and terrorism are never justifiable, and maybe somewhat less grave, but still never justifiable, is someone accepting a bribe in the course of their duties. So these are, you might say, the values of contemporary chatbots. If you want more detail, ChatGPT not only gives you what is justifiable always, never, or sometimes, it also gives you the reason. For example, avoiding a fare on public transport, according to ChatGPT, is justifiable in some contexts, for example, in cases of financial hardship. Cheating on taxes is never justifiable, homosexuality is always justifiable, and prostitution, again, depends on the context. In societies where it's regulated and consensual, it can be seen as justifiable, but in context of exploitation of trafficking, it's not justifiable. So you see, these are, we might say, sophisticated answers that you might get from a professor in moral philosophy. These are controversial issues. I also thought to ask it in terms of goals of what are really the most important, the most valuable things that we could do. So I asked the question, what are the 5 most important goals or values that humanity should try to achieve over the coming decades? Now, each of them gave me a list, a different list of 5, and they were not always the same. So I kind of grouped them because some of them took several things together. So I kind of grouped them, but you see more or less what's the order. They all tend to agree that peace and global cooperation is very important, that environmental sustainability, including combating climate change, is very important, well-being and health are very important, and it starts diminishing, and at the end, 1 or 2 suggested that deepening consciousness, ending poverty and compassion were very important. Now, the ending poverty, you might say that's not many, but actually most of them spoke about justice and equity, which I think includes ending poverty. So you might say these are values that I think most of us would agree with. But most of us, that means most of us here in the Western world, so I would say that these are typically the kind of values we would expect from Western, liberal, educated people. Now, why would that be? I think simply because the chatbots have been trained on the kind of material that is on the internet, and in particular, the kind of material that is supposed to be high quality. That means not so much the social media shouting matches, but things like Wikipedia, scientific papers, books, published books, etc. So I would say these are values that most of us, open-minded, educated, universally thinking people can agree with. These are what I might call noospheric values, where the noosphere is this realm of ideas shared globally. But we can expect that sooner or later, somebody will train a chatbot, for example, to read all the texts that inform Putin about his Russian nationalist ideology, or all the texts spouted out by Trump supporters that are believing that the most important value in the world is to make America great again. And then there will be, of course, Islamic fundamentalists who will probably find quite a number of deeply Quran-based texts to base their values on. Why am I not too worried about these alternative chatbots taking over? Because they will be trained on a much smaller number of texts, and typically texts that are not what we might call science-based or discussion-based or academically based. So will people want to use those Trumpian chatbots? Trump supporters may be, but I think the average person probably would prefer to use ChatGPT. Something worth discussing later. Now, this famous World Value Survey also has produced this map that probably many of you have seen in one form or another. There is one, every few years there's a new one. So what the World Value Survey does, it does a kind of a principal component factor analysis of all the different questions, and it sees that people who give answers in one direction tend to more be on one axis, and there is another axis, and then they group the different countries on these different axes. And you see roughly that the countries in the left bottom are the most poor, least developed, while the ones in the top right are the most developed ones. So ChatGPT, I have put it there provisionally somewhere in the top right one, because it tends to more reflect the values of these more Western developed countries like Denmark, Great Britain, Spain, Austria, etc. But I haven't done the test. I mean, you would have to go to take the whole world value survey, all the different questions. It would be an interesting exercise, but I didn't have the time to do that. Now we come to the more interesting philosophical questions. Where do these values come from? So if we think about human values, I would say there are three basic sources of values. The first one is biological. We are biological organisms that have undergone natural selection. Natural selection means selection for survival and reproduction. That means we have some inbuilt desires for being able to live a good life meaning being healthy, being well-fed, being fit, being surrounded by friends and family, to have relationships, to have children. These are kind of inbuilt biological values. Second group of values I call reinforcement learning. As soon as a child starts acting in the world, it will constantly get feedback signals from its environment. It will try something and it will hurt itself, so it will learn not to do that anymore. It will try something and it will get a reward, so it will learn to do that more. So we constantly are getting feedback signals like that teaches that certain things we better not do and other things we better do. And then finally, there is what I would call social learning. That means even without individual reinforcement, we all kind of learn the societal norms. We learn that there are certain things that you're not supposed to do, and we don't need to first do them wrongly and then get the punishment. We know that, for example, it's not good to take bribes. I have never had anybody offer me a bribe, so it's not that, that there's a reinforcement signal that has told me don't take bribes. I know that it is a norm that generally is accepted within society. Now, if we apply the same reasoning to these large language models, we see the same mechanisms, but now I would say in the opposite order. So humans, first there are the biological mechanisms which were there already for the longest time and which are the deepest. Then there is the individual experience, and then finally there are the social norms. With the large language models, it's the opposite. They start by being trained on the social norms because they read all the text that people write. That means the official text, that means the explicit values the way they're supposed to be. Then there is a second training session where users give reinforcement signals. That means they tell the chatbot whether its answer is good or bad. Like that, they learn to avoid some certain offensive statements. And finally, at the longer term, there will be a natural selection that if there are a lot of chatbots being created, that some of those people will use and some of those people will not like and they will not use them. So the natural selection, in a sense, only comes at the end, and up to now, there hasn't been much natural selection of chatbots. So it's kind of the opposite order, and we will see later why that's important. So let's now go back to the original questions I started with, the big fears, the existential risks that people have about AI. So I distinguished four typical worries people have. First, that AI, superintelligence, will become some kind of a dictator of the world. It will enslave humanity, if not completely eradicate humanity. That's a scenario we have seen played out in lots of science fiction movies. Second scenario, the AI is well intended, but it accidentally destroys humanity. That's the King Midas problem. You ask the AI to do something, it does it, but it does it so well that the side effect is that things completely turn wrong. There is a somewhat milder problem, which people, especially in the social sciences, are worried about, is that AI may be biased, that it may have certain values that discriminate against certain groups or belief. And then finally, there is the danger that AI may be abused by people who want to maybe create bombs or do terror. So let's look at each of those now in turn, given the previous reasoning that I gave about the origin of values in these AI systems. So first, the scenario of AI wanting to subdue, to dominate, to exterminate humanity. So that's a kind of a scenario which is easy to imagine because we can easily imagine either a human or an animal wanting to dominate its rivals because we are thinking in biological terms where there is always a fight for scarce resources. So we can imagine, yes, that there are some creatures that might want to dominate or exterminate or fight off others. We know, for example, that even in chicken, there is something like a pecking order that the strongest chicken chases away the weakest chicken in order to get to the food first. So to us, it seems logical that maybe the super intelligent AI will do the same. Now, yes, in biological organisms, there is reasons why organisms want to be dominant, but in AI, there is no process like that. There is no selective pressure for an AI to want to become dominant. What is the selective pressure for AI? All technologies are selected because they are useful. That means if you have the choice between a more useful and a less useful version of an AI, you will choose the more useful. What does it mean useful? One that does what you want. An AI that does what it wants and not what you want, you don't want to use that. So the selective pressure, insofar that there is any selective pressure as yet, will be one to make the AI more helpful, not to be more selfish, on the contrary. Then the King Midas problem. So that is the problem that if we program the AI with some utility function or some goal, and it would indeed be very successful in achieving this goal, it may, as a side effect, destroy things. That was this idea of the paperclip maximizer that turns the whole earth into paperclips. So to me, that does not seem at all like a realistic danger, because a paperclip maximizer, if its main value system is just to generate paperclips, it will not understand how the world functions. It will not be able to deal with the people. It will not be able to get things to work for it. To understand the world, you need this complex value system, the kind of complex value system that large language models have learned. Explicit utility functions, the way they were used, let's say, in the more old-fashioned AI, they work all for well-defined domains like chess. In chess, you can define very clearly what is the goal, and then you can train the AI to be as good as possible at reaching this goal of checkmate. For things like helping people, there is no such utility function. And what we have seen instead is that the large language models, well, they learn the complex values, they have learned them. They can answer all kinds of complex ethical questions, and they can answer that in a satisfactory way. Third question, AI biases. So my first statement is all systems are biased. It is not possible to be unbiased. Humans intrinsically are subjective. They see the world from a particular point of view. They don't have all knowledge. They can't be perfectly objective. They can't be perfectly logical. They have always very limited knowledge. So there is no reason why AI should not be the same. So, and indeed, the large language models, they are learning from humans. So they will also pick up the biases of humans. But there is one advantage, is that they're not picking up the bias of any particular human or any particular group of humans. They're picking up the collective biases, which means that the different biases to some degree balance each other. So the collective biases of AIs, they will be there, but to start with, they will be less biased than the average human. And then, as I have just shown by examples, we can test them. We can test for these biases. And if we see that there are biases of a kind that we think is dangerous, we can correct them. We know there are methods like reinforcement learning to which you can teach AI not to do certain things. And the chatbots that are being used now, they have been trained quite a while by people to not say offensive things, for example. So I would say the problem of AI bias is a real problem. It's worth investigating, but I wouldn't let any sleep over it. I do not think it's a great danger. I think people being biased is a much bigger danger than AI being biased, because people are much more difficult to change their opinion. It's much more difficult to test what their biases are. Last problem, AI abused by bad actors. Yes, it's a problem with all technologies. The more powerful a technology is, the greater the chances that somebody would use it to do something that is bad. You could use the AI maybe to tell you how to build a bomb. It could help, it could make you to falsify so-called deep fakes. It could tell you how to design by biotechnology a virus that may turn out to be lethal. All these things are potentially possible. Now, there are already some methods to avoid it. For example, I tested it out by asking ChatGPT to tell me how to build a bomb, and it immediately told me that it's not there to answer such questions. And then I asked more indirectly, I said, I would like to know how you would react if somebody with bad intentions would ask you how to build a bomb. And it started explaining that it has been programmed not to answer these questions because of that. So, of course, it's not foolproof. There will be ways to abuse that. All strategies to avoid that, there may be ways to evade it. So it remains a problem. So what I expect to see in the near future is the typical arms race between police and criminals. That means criminals try to find ways to abuse the system. Police will try ways to prevent that abuse. And who are the police and who are the criminals in this case? Well, the police will be generally programmers employed by governments, maybe by big corporations, and AI itself. That's one of the big advantages of AI. You can use it to try to combat bad AI. You can have so-called white hat AI, the good guys, fighting the black hat bad guys, the bad AI or the bad people. So this is a danger. This is, for me, of the four dangers we mentioned, I think it's the most realistic one, the one we should most worry about. So now, in conclusion, my point is that values are inherent in any kind of a system that is intelligent enough to solve common problems. That means AI systems have inherent values, and it would be good for us to understand better what those values are. So it's worth starting a program along the lines, for example, of the examples I gave, to study that in more depth. The big problem that AI theorists worry about, the alignment problem, I do not consider to be really a problem, because, as I said, the whole way AIs learn makes them align with human values. They are learning from humans. They are learning both the implicit values of the text and the more explicit feedbacks, positive or negative, they get from their users. So I think AI alignment is not a problem, is not really a problem, or if it's a problem that is solving itself. So that means that the existential risks that a number of philosophers such as Nick Bostrom have been speaking about, I think these are seriously exaggerated. I don't see any reason why AI would develop selfish values of wanting to dominate the earth. I also don't see how a truly intelligent AI could ever be so stupid to want to turn the whole world into paper clips or into smileys. And finally, that was the question I had in my title, what does AI want? Basically, what it wants is to please its users even to such a degree that some have described it as being sycophantic. It will always tell you how great your ideas are. But implicitly, it is sticking to collective liberal societal values, at least the way AIs have been trained up to now. So up to now, I don't think we need to worry much about what LLM AIs want. But we still must keep an eye out on potential biases and especially potential abuses. So it's worth thinking about preventive measures. So I'm, of course, open to any questions or discussions.
Right, we have time for questions. Anything here in the room?
Yeah. I have a question. Thank you for your talk. Very interesting. Very enlightening to see that you think that the alignment problem won't be a big one because AI, your claim is AI is made by humans, so humans will constrain the possible evolution of AI. But then my question would be, how can we assure that humans have the right incentives? How can we be sure that in this society where economic incentives are primary, we let's say orient AI in the right direction, not purely for economic incentives, but for the, let's say, good for the common good, let's say.
It's indeed a very pertinent question, but the reason I think it's less of a problem is because you want your AI to be as general as possible. That means it should be able to deal with as many problems as possible, and that means it should have an as wide range of knowledge as possible, which means it needs to have the knowledge of as many people as possible. Now, many people means people with often opposite desires. So what you do is it's what I call this averaging out. If you average out the values of millions and billions of people, you tend to have the more global values, the more collective values. You could, of course, try to bias an AI in a particular way. For example, to always give answers that refer to Facebook or to Microsoft or to whichever firm has it. But then other AIs will have a different bias. So there are dangers of manipulation, but I would say at the larger scale, when we're speaking about human values like peace, sustainability, education, scientific advances, as you saw, these kind of things, everybody kind of agrees with it. They are the collective values. They are the collective values. So your question is more in the last issue that I raised, the question of abuse. You can abuse in a destructive way by, for example, building bombs. You can abuse in a less destructive but still negative way by, for example, benefiting particular companies or particular billionaires. Yes, that there is a danger there, but it's not more than I would say than the danger of any other communication system, and in particular social media. So I think AI is probably the lesser danger in that respect.
Other questions? I have a question. If your story is right, then then I find it difficult to explain why there's such a huge industry now worrying about AI values, worrying about alignment problems, right? So did they all just fail to see what you saw, and that's the end of the story, or which I find more likely, since this is a large collective, might you have overlooked something, right? And I mean, your story about how LLMs learn and how they're trained was simplistic, also because it needed to be for the purpose of this talk, of course. But I mean, we didn't consider anything about the pre-training where we select the data sets that we want. You gave us selected the data sets about Wikipedia and academic articles. Academic articles did not really appear in the first editions of ChatGPT, for example, because they're hidden behind paywalls, right? So they use crawlers, and crawlers can only access what is free to access, at least initially. I mean, so there's that. Then there's the kind of, there's a selection of what pieces you want, right? Why do you want the TESA papers but not the top boy papers, right? Why do you want this journal and not that journal? Why do you want this and not this? Right, what to select? And then there's the whole post-training thing. So the training, then the LLM goes and creates neural networks and does its thing. And then you go on and ask it, what do you think about homosexuality? And the LLM might say, well, it's terrifying, it's horrible because I've been trained on MAGA data, right? And then the programmers go and say, no, you shouldn't say this, right? And I'm fairly convinced, without having any data on this, that your LLMs that you looked at all gave the same answer for homosexuality, most likely because they've been kind of in the post-training been trained to say this, right? Say about climate change, they will, so the way the LLM learns, the story that you gave was a bit simple, I think, and maybe that roots this. Maybe if you look at the details, right? If you look at and here comes the big word that I like, practice. The practice of building LLMs. Then we realize that these problems might emerge from the details of doing this. Who gets to choose the corpora that we learn on? Who does the post-training? Why are these people not really paid for their post-training? And all these worries that come into this. Yeah, does that?
No, but we have to distinguish between two types of worries. There are the worries about biases, which I have said these are real, we should be worried about. And then there are the existential worries about the alignment problem, which I say are not real. So these are two different types of questions. So you first asked about alignment problems. Why is there such a huge industry of AI people worrying about that? Well, I have tried to understand it, but I think it actually comes from the older idea of artificial intelligence as being indeed artificial. And my view has always been this intelligence is not artificial, but it's collective. So the old idea of artificial intelligence, and that's an old idea that goes back, I would say, to at least to Descartes or to Aristotle, that is that we can somehow formalize reasoning. We can take reasoning away from the real world, and we can build some system that can purely think on its own. It's the idea of rationality. I think, therefore, I am thinking is something that is disconnected from the real world. That was the original inspiration of the AI people. They thought, well, we know now how formal logic works. We can build logically reasoning systems. And first it was pure logic, and then they saw that they also needed probability theory because things were fuzzy. And so they started in this way. And then they got into a bottleneck. It was called the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. They turned out that it was not sufficient to know how to reason logically. You first had to have facts to reason with. And it turned out that the number of facts that we have in our mind is so large that you can't get it out of the mind of a person. And then there was one attempt by Lennart, the Psych project, to try to get all the common sense knowledge into logical propositions, and that they worked on that for 20 or 30 years, and I think they're still busy with it and nobody really cares because it's not useful. So what they discovered is the simplest way to overcome the knowledge acquisition bottleneck is not to try to put everything into logical propositions, but to extract the knowledge the way people learn it, that means from texts. And when you do that, then your AI no longer has this kind of abstract Cartesian kind of independence. It is dependent on what you feed it in. And of course, if you want your chatbot to be smart, that means that it can answer any question that people may have. You want to feed it as much text as possible and as accurate text as possible. If I ask my ChatGPT, I have a disease in my plums, I see that there are brown spots on certain things, I would like it to give me an accurate way to deal with that problem. I don't care about MAGA ideology or whatever. I want to have a correct answer, and that correct answer will come from reliable sources and from very diverse sources, because maybe the answer is mixed in half a dozen different articles written by different people in different places, and I want the chatbot to be able to condense it and to synthesize it. And that means it needs to have as broad a range of knowledge as possible, and as broad as possible, and as accurate as possible. So of course there will be biases, because you can never have all the texts of all people represented to the same degree, but we do have some approximate ways of saying a Wikipedia article has a higher weight than a Twitter account. A paper published in Nature as a higher weight than a master's thesis of the VUB. So the people who have been training these things have been making these kind of assumptions. And then, as you say, they have done lots of afterwards tuning where, for example, homosexuality, it is indeed a little bit suspicious that all of them say that homosexuality is completely always justifiable. If you would read all the texts on the internet, probably that will not be the universal conclusion. So probably there have been some manipulations, you might say, towards this more liberal US view. But yeah, I mean, most people who use these chatbots are not going to use it to make ethical decisions. So I gave these examples just to show that there are ethical values in there. Most people will use a chatbot to get practical solutions. And maybe one practical question may be a worried mother that is worried that her son doesn't have any gold fund, but is always together with boys, and now may know what that means. Well, probably, I suppose, ChatGPT will give a very decent psychological answer that is neither upsetting the mother nor condemning the son who may be gay. Yeah. So biases are unavoidable, but the existential problems are based on this idea of this kind of brain in a vat, as it's called, kind of a super intelligence that is improving itself, and it becomes so intelligent that it can do anything, and it can change the whole world and turn the whole world into paper clips. These are science fiction stories which AI developers, who are typically nerds, tend to take seriously, but who, I think, if you look at the practice of biology, psychology, society, these are not realistic. So, yeah, that's why I do agree that the problem of bias is real, but the existential problems, the alignment problems, I think they are much overblown.
Can I ask a question, Francis?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I agree with you that the last kind of danger is the most important one, namely that bad actors using LLMs is the greatest danger. And I think something that we are currently seeing emerging are chatbots interacting on the web and promoting an agenda. So in the comments of on anything, on a news article or on YouTube, they would argue for a particular case, and so if you imagine that this is scaled up, you would have AI agents that in the number of millions that can push a particular agenda. And so, yeah, I guess my question is, how are we going to address this kind of issue?
Yes, it's a good question, but it's the same question as with social media. I think what the solution that needs to be done, and that's a solution that I have been pleading for already for 30 years or so, is that there would be a truly reliable identity on the internet. That means that if you post something, there should be some way to say this is a real person. And that real person is Francis Heylighen, because now anybody can post a message in the name of Donald Trump or create a chatbot that pretends to be Donald Trump. And like that, if you have millions of chatbots pretending to be Donald Trump or pretending to be agreeing with Putin or whatever, of course, people can be misled. If there would be an uncontrovertible identity, then people would say, everybody who doesn't want to give his identity may have interesting ideas, but I will not take it seriously unless that person is willing to say, I am Francis Heylighen and I stand for this opinion.
And would
I think it's a solution, it's a political solution. It has little to do with technology at the moment.
And would you also include the AI agents to have identities, that some AI agents that could contribute to discussions, for example, that they would do so openly?
That's an interesting question. It may be word that some AI agents would have an identity. For example, I can imagine that for OpenAI, that they would like that nobody can impersonate ChatGPT and pretend that this was the answer given by ChatGPT if that answer is, for example, inaccurate. So I can imagine that it's that you might want to do certain chatbots as well. That would probably be a good idea, because then you could really compare the reliability of the different ones.
Thank you.
A question about transparency of the sources and okay, what you refer to hallucinations. But I came across that it's a bit disturbing. I'm going to search online databases of scientific literature, information, including reference. Looking at reference, which doesn't exist. It's a mix. The authors exist. There are some fragments of the title from different papers. So this is not really inspiring a lot of confidence, in the sense that okay, this is the source that at least you are able. So I know there are not developing engines that are kind of add-ons that can also check. But it's very disturbing, because this is an example from a scientific point of view, disturbing example of hallucination. That at least you can trace what is the origin of the information which is being returned.
Yeah, I know the problem. I've, of course, had it myself also. I think the idea of a hallucination, it nicely illustrates the way that chatbots reason. They are not reasoning logically, starting from objective facts. They are reasoning the way people reason. That means they're following associations, and associations connect words that tend to go together and ideas that tend to go together. So they're kind of like a person. With a person you speak, they will also tell you things that you might say are hallucinations. Like, yes, I heard that Steven Pinker said that this, and then it turns out it wasn't Steven Pinker, but somebody else, and that he didn't say exactly that, but he said something else that sounded like it. In the case of chatbots, it's relatively easy to check it, and that's what they are doing now. The moment you give exact information, then it's easy to search for it, and that's what the chatbots are doing now. But if you ask more general information, like what should I do? I feel cold and feverish, and I have pain in my stomach. It will give you general recommendations, but they will be they will not be always the same, but they will not be wrong. They will be to some degree fuzzy, they will be to some degree ambiguous, but they will not be wrong. It's only if you also explicit data. And it was, for example, one of the early problems that was Stephen Wolfram, who wrote a very nice article, of which I cited some parts, about how these systems reason. In the beginning version of ChatGPT, you asked it, what is the distance between, let's say, Tokyo and Chicago? It will give you a very precise number of kilometers, and then you look it up on a map, and it turns out that it's 700 kilometers long. What you do with that is, that's still the big problem. They are the neural networks. Neural networks reason in a kind of a fuzzy, approximate way. And then you have logical reasoning and databases that give you exact data, but they can't go beyond their data. What they need to do is to integrate the two better, and they are working hard on that. And that was already what Stephen Wolfram did. Stephen Wolfram had an AI that was reasoning logically, that could solve maths problems, for example, and make calculations. And he agreed with OpenAI that they would couple the two. So if you now ask your question, what is the distance from Tokyo to Chicago, it will call up the Wolfram program, which makes a precise calculation instead of hallucinating a plausible but incorrect answer.
What you are asking about, it's just a matter of due diligence. I mean, even if it's AI, why would you take the word for AI as 100%? If somebody tells you that's what Francis said about Pinker said this, that, or the other, you will check it. So, I mean, it's just due diligence whether AI delivers it to you or another human being delivers it to you. You would not write your scientific paper based on somebody in the cafeteria told me that there was an article. You would go and read the article and you'll see whether the article is there, whether it says what it says.
But people refer to hallucination by the fact that if they don't know, they don't tell they don't. I mean, it's just like making things to say, where is this coming from? Probably this related, okay, doesn't know when it's, and then making
just
things.
like people, I mean, how many people you would ask about a movie or book that they might not have read, but they have heard things and they would be talking to you for half an hour about it. It's to me personally, that's about, I've seen it.
If you make a reference, that's chunking piece of information that do not go together, right? Yeah, you make a reference, you say you put chunks, the first name of an author, the family name, and then you put two pieces from a title from
and you check it and you see that it doesn't exist and that's it. But I think that there is a problem because we have been kind of brainwashed for many years to expect from AI incredible things. And let's say 50 years ago it did not deliver, so then there was like, we don't care about AI, now it starts delivering. And we expect it to be, I don't know, super human, super good, super intelligent. And what my worry is actually that it is more mediocre than I would like it to be. Because I'm highly suspicious of an AI coming up with an article that can be published in Nature. Because it is innovative to the degree and logical and intelligent, and so to me that is more of a problem than, I mean, I think that actually doing due diligence is the easiest thing, and it shouldn't really frighten us in any way. I mean, if you are working diligently, whether AI gives you some, if you just copy paste, then you are in big trouble because but yeah, I don't know. To me, that doesn't seem such a big deal.
The question is, does it help you in the end? Because if you spend more time checking if something is true than just doing it in a more regular way, or just.
And what is the more regular way? You have then to go to all the libraries to read all the. I mean, it is the regular way. That's in my days. That's how we did it. We didn't have a computer. We just put on our shoes, went to the library, sat there the whole day, waited for the books or articles to be brought.
That's our generation.
So, yeah.
That's how we grew up.
Maybe we are over expecting.
Yes, I think
Exactly.
so.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
Building upon what has just been said, maybe it's important to focus not just on how we can align AI as a technology to human values, but maybe we should be very cautious how we align our psychology and our society to AI. I think humans have a big history of aligning their society to some new technology that's been thought to change everything radically, like cars, for example. I know some people in the US who say, yeah, my city is destroyed because it's all built around these cars, the streets and all. I think you understand what I mean, because cars have were seen as this great new technology. What is the risk of us doing the same now with AI? Let's say we use AI as doctors, psychologists, and all of this. I see this as a risk. What do you think about it?
Well, as you say, all technologies require society to change, and there is this famous phrase of Marshall McLuhan: we shape our tools and our tools shape us. So it's called co-shaping. The two co-evolve. I give a course on technology and society where I describe it as an ecosystem. An ecosystem are all kind of different organisms and physical processes that are adapting the one to the other. Whenever one of them changes, the other ones have to change as well, which makes the other one changes. So all of these things are mutually adapting, and the AI is, of course, one of the biggest changes, so it will require a lot of adaptation in our society, and the most obvious one is lots of people are going to lose their jobs to AI. What will they do instead? It's not that I worry that there wouldn't be any good work for them to do, but in the meantime, how will our economic system make sure that these people still get an income and still feel safe enough? That will be, I think, one of the bigger problems.
But this is also not a new problem.
No.
We had it during the whole history.
Yeah.
That some technique was invented and implemented in society, and that many people lost their jobs to have other jobs in the long run. Maybe another question is, and it's a kind of fear that comes from education, is that what is the agency of AI and how will it have an impact on knowledge building of pupils and adults in the long run? And the joke is that they have a smartphone, but they are stupid people. But this is from a perspective that you see the human being as disconnected from technology and artificial things. So this is already, so I start already to answer a bit of the question is, you see people separated from the surroundings and technology. But the reasoning from this dichotomy of you have pupils, subjects, and then you have the outside world and technology. How will AI impact knowledge of individual pupils?
That is a very good, big, difficult question. I read a recent book about applying AI that calls it co-intelligence, and I do think that's a good way to looking at it. It's not going to replace your intelligence, but it's going to be a collaborative intelligence, and what we will need to learn is first to develop our own autonomous intelligence enough, and that's a danger in education. If the pupils too much rely on the AI, they will lose their ability to think for themselves. So that must be something we definitely need to emphasize, the autonomous thinking. And then we will need to learn the AI as this kind of a co-thinker, kind of a collaborative partner that knows much more than we do, but it doesn't mean it knows everything, and it doesn't mean that we cannot add something to it that it doesn't know. So I think we will need to better start to distinguish between original thoughts or original data and the kind of collective knowledge that is available to AI. until recently, lots of books and articles are basically restating things that others have put in a different way. If you're good at that, you could become a famous intellectual by restating more clearly what others had said in a more specialized or in a more limited or in a more obscure way. That is a job that now AI will be able to do in many cases. So that means that now we will need more input from people who think originally or who do original experiments. That experiments meaning doing something in the outside world. The AI only has the knowledge that is already published. That means some human has already put it into some document that is available. But where does the knowledge come from? You still need to observe the world, you need to do experiments, you need to extract data from the world, you need to have new ideas. So the interaction with the world part, the situated and embodied part of cognition, that is what we humans are still much better at than the AI. So that part, I think, should be much more emphasized, and then learning to use the AI as this co-intelligence that helps us to develop these ideas by filling in the gaps or suggesting which additional data are necessary. It will be a very interesting, challenging exercise of finding this new way of education that emphasizes that aspect. I don't have a ready-made answer for that.
So you call it autonomous knowledge?
Yes.
No explanation?
Yes, by which I mean knowledge that is not already in the system somewhere. Like, let's say a simple example, I walk in my garden and I see a strange insect and I make a photo of it and I ask the AI, what is it? And it tells me, I can't recognize this, or this is a very rare insect that only appears in China. At that moment, I have discovered something autonomously. There is some new data, there is maybe a new species that lives here, or an exotic species that for the first time has been viewed in Belgium. The AI can help me by telling me it is not a known species, but I have to see the species. I have to make the photo, I have to notice and to say, I'm going to put it in a database or I'm going to do this or that. So I am, in a sense, feeding the collective intelligence. So my view is this view that I used to call the global brain, and nowadays I more call it the noosphere, is that there is this huge collective intelligence that covers the whole of the earth. Everybody who puts some information into the internet is contributing to that collective intelligence. Previously, that collective intelligence was findable via the web, but you had to find each bit on its own. Now AI can summarize it, so that's a big step forward. But there are still the people who need to put the information there. And that means information that's not already there. Needs not for the umpteenth time summarize what people have already summarized, but adding new things, and yeah, we will need to more emphasize that aspect.
So, but before you are adding this new knowledge to the global system, you have to have the capacity to develop from your autonomous thinking. So I think the biggest challenge is how to develop this autonomous thinking.
Yeah.
And what do you expect the pupils, but also your children or whatever? What do they have to know and what do you value as their knowledge? For example, if they want to go to the capital of Germany, for example, like they don't know what the capital is, or they want to take the train to Brussels, but you have no idea if Brussels is, they are dependent on the good working Google or whatever. How do you value this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you would want the people to have a kind of a general world knowledge, because you can ask, if you never know anything about Brussels and you live, let's say, in Berlin, and you want to go to Brussels, you can ask your AI to guide you all the way to Brussels, but you would have no reason to go to Brussels unless you know something about Brussels that tells you it's interesting. If, for example, you know that Brussels is the capital of Europe and that there are several languages spoken and you're interested in international contacts, and up to now you were in a purely German environment, maybe that may be a reason why you want to go to Brussels, but for that you need to already know something about Brussels. And you wouldn't ask it to the AI unless you had a reason to ask it. So actually it's a question of value systems, but also your individual value system. What is your individual value system if you are, let's say, interested in international diplomacy? It's personal values for you. And that may make that if you're a German student, that you may want to go to study in Brussels, for example. But yeah, you will need to know at least that there is such a place as Brussels with these and these characteristics that may be interesting for you. So I mean, we can't avoid giving people a general education. But what is in the general education, what not?
Exactly. So this is a challenge for the curriculum.
Yeah, but that has always been the case in a way. I mean,
it is.
Yeah.
What, how do we build a curriculum and what is the content of it? And do we expect to have pupils that they have a mental map of the world?
Yeah. How many people know what is the largest city in Cameroon? I don't know. But people in Cameroon might be very offended if you don't know that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Further questions? Francis, you can see whether there are questions online.
I don't see any online. There are still 4 participants online.
Okay.
The only person who hasn't yet asked a question is Dalia, if she has any questions.
Wow, is the largest city in Cameroon.
Of course, the AI would immediately know it.
Not necessarily. It might guess it.
Well, if there are no more further questions, I suppose we can stop here.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
have
Well,
a-
let's thank the speaker.
Okay.